Hi. Hi, everybody. Welcome. We're going to talk, after the last session that was quite advanced, we're going to talk about essentials. What kind of threat hunting you can do if you don't sit all day in front of the computer and hunt, right? Some of the advanced analysts are going to see some quite advanced things today, but this is something you could all try at home. And even those of you that want to try in real time can try in real time. We have an environment enabled. The environment will also be available once we publish the recording to the session that we are recording right now, right? Yes, we are. Great. So, hi, I'm Eddie Almer. I'm in charge for product management for TDIR. That's threat detection, incident response for Logpoint. That means we're looking at threat detection and incident response as one full life cycle of how do we protect an organization. So SOAR, UEBA, SIM, director, and the most important part, security research that helps you come up with the content, the rules, the playbooks that are needed for the detection and for the remediation of those problems. This is part of my group. I've been at endpoint vendors, I've been at network vendors, and have done product management for probably 15 years in cybersecurity, or maybe even closer to 20 now. And I really love building customer solutions. We, meaning mainly Basudev, who's heading our security research. Basudev, a few words.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So my name is Basudev Raut, and I'm working in Nepal as a head of security research team. And my past background is I have done the compliance audits of major commercial banks in Nepal itself. And I have been associated with Logpoint since 2018. And I joined as a pre-sales engineer, got promoted to manager in customer success, and I'm now heading the security research department in Nepal.
So Basudev gives us the honor to be here 17 hours from Nepal.
So what we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about how you can use threat intelligence to hunt. If Kenneth was still here in the room, he would tell you that using threat intelligence is not really threat hunting because, hey, you don't need to go and invent something new. But the truth is, for most of us, you don't really have time to invent things. You're not sitting all day in front of the computer, and you do need to find those things that didn't immediately pop up with the rules. For example, because somebody was uploading some data to Gmail. You can't really trigger on somebody uploading data to Gmail. That's not an alert you can live with. So for those, you have threat intelligence. Threat intelligence that somebody has already detected an attack that behaves in a certain way and can give you a hint where to look. That's where you start. It still doesn't mean that once you find where to start, everything else is done. And Basudev is going to talk about, okay, first of all, where do you start, and then how you continue. Then we'll talk about using UEBA for internal risks. UEBA is also a great threat hunting tool because it detects things that are unusual, anomalies in the environment. And again, like threat intelligence, it's not that you look at it and you have one alert and then you're done, finished. It's only the beginning point for actually investigating that attack and then responding to it. So where do we start? We start with actually leveraging threat intelligence. We have recorded future. We have a standard STIX-TAXII. STIX-TAXII is the actual protocol that is being used for sharing of threat intelligence. We have open source partners like MASP that allow you to consume information provided by your cert, provided by other open source sources, and we're working on actually adding even more partners that can provide you with very specific information about attacks that are very relevant to you from your peers that would allow you to make it much easier to find problems. How? Basudev.
Yeah, thank you, Eddie. So, of course, there's a generally accepted categories of threat hunting, right? as Kenneth mentioned about the APTs that we call the structured threat hunting, where we develop a threat hunt plan, actually setting up some threat hunting hypothesis. And that is more proactive in nature because you are going after certain threat actors that are more prominent in your region. So you need to know about your industry. You need to be more, informed about the context around where these threat actors are active. Geographical distributions might be an important factor to consider. The other is the major threat actors in those attacking those industries or the geography. And the other is the unstructured threat hunting, where you go after some indicators of compromise. And the third is usually the kind of entity-based threat hunting, where you go after the critical computing resource you have in the organization. So when we talk about the threat intelligence in Logpoint, so for this purpose of this demonstration, we have used Recorded Future, which is a tech alliance. We have a tech alliance with Recorded Future. So where do we start from? We start from a trigger, one IOC, let's say. So there's a threat intelligence match with C2C connections. And if you go to the incident view, next slide, please, Eddie. So there's a match. Okay, so Logpoint is able to detect with the threat intelligence feed that is Recorded Future. So you can see a validated CNC server, and the enrichment you can easily differentiate with the color indications there. So you have IP address that is saying there is some CNC match found in the logs so far from your traffic or the firewall logs. So if you go and drill down to the Recorded Future, so it's an interesting drill down feature provided by Recorded Future. So go to the overview, you can see the major current and the historical links of that CNC activity.
So you saw some of the statistical analysis that Kenneth was showing earlier. Some of the integrations that we have will do it for you, so you can see how many sightings on how many sources, and how risky it's considered by somebody outside your organization that is looking at many other organizations and measuring how many sightings of this specific IOC. Okay, so let's look at the IOCs. What is this IOC? So, Basudev.
Yeah, so we dealt with the IP, and it's referring to some pestwin.com. So it's showing up the URL that is associated with the CNC, and it is the Cobalt Strike CNC so far seen from the recent reference. And for the geography, some kind of geolocations context, you can go to the Sudan. That gives you the overall old map view of the CNC activity there. So we have now the external IP or the external CNC identified, and we have the internal private IP that is communicating with that particular CNC server. So how do you find it in Logpoint is you just mention the IP that is communicating. That's matched with the Recorded Future threat intel feed, and you just chart count by host. Now you are pivoting everything around that particular host.
So hasn't spread very much, a single endpoint in the organization, but fortunately for us, it's quite noisy. It's done a lot of connections, and we can continue investigating.
Yeah, and we then go to the process network connections. So of course, we'll require the sysmon or other EDR logging mechanism here, because Windows is particularly not recommended for such type of threat hunting because of the inherent noise it causes in the network. So further drilling down towards the process, and then you can see the process creations, the child process creations. So typically, if you see the example, it's something like a macro-enabled Word file creating, spurning a PowerShell activity, which is a very, very, in fact, a common way for ransomware or malware actors to operate.
Right? So we caught this attack in the middle, and now what we're actually going is going back. How did it get here? What did it do? And based on the TTPs of the specific threat actor that is using that, that's a fair guess. We don't know exactly which, so we look for a pretty large set of them. But here it is. We're on the right endpoint, and we looked for quite a long list of combinations, and fortunately for us, only one. So it's a very good guess that this is what this WinWord actually had a macro, run PowerShell, relatively easy.
Yeah, and if you want further digging down on the parent processes, there's other queries around the taxonomized Logpoint query. So you have levels there, level creation. Level is process, so that means the process is created and a child process is spawned by a parent process. So in this case, we have the PowerShell now and being spawning the Adobe exe process.
Okay, so now we have a pretty good idea of the attack, and we also have probably a pretty good idea of what to do next.
Yeah,
but let's see what damage has been done.
Yeah, so there's the other way around of looking into the event. So you can see the file creation. So this is a world writable public directory where often the malware actors write some specific malware payloads and create some specialized files. And here you can see the users public. This is a world writable directory, and the PowerShell.exe is what the creating the file there is adobe.exe, which is of course a malicious, as per we believe. So next is the Cobalt Strike default SSL certificate that usually used by the attackers, and though it is possible for them to change in the later versions of Cobalt Strike, but they are not found to be that energetic or that proactive to change the SSL certificate. So we still see the default SSL certificate being used by the attackers. And if you have some ideas, logging source like Zik or Suricata, you can then see the certificate serial number or certificate issuer information.
So now we're sure exactly who is making those command and control connections.
Yeah. The other is named pipe. So named pipe are usually used by the attackers for inter-process communications. So this is another way of looking into the attack scenarios being developed there.
And remember, we were talking about unraveling the attack. You can respond much, much earlier, even if you don't know everything about what happened, and you don't always know everything. It's not always as straightforward, and everything gets connected nicely. But we started from the communication going out, and this is something we can definitely block. Now we can also block other things that were done, and the nice thing is this is built in. You can run it from within case management and basically block indicators. So
yeah. So now we have the Agent X coming up with the EDR capabilities we have. So you can run inbuilt playbooks there, both for investigation as well as response purposes. For instance, in the example here, we are using block IOCs, block IP, block domain, or block hash, reset user credentials to auto-generated password, isolate endpoint that is seen as the malicious workstation or so.
right? So if you're starting from the case, you had all that information that we unraveled as we looked, started from the IOC and found all the other parameters. Even if we only block the IOC, it would still keep us relatively safe. But of course, we want to do a full cleanup and remove every single trace of that attack so it doesn't wake up and then come back from another direction. So, when we're summarizing, when you're looking at threat intelligence, look for the right category. Look for somebody who is in your space and doing stuff that is relevant to you geographically and by vertical, because there are many, many attacks out there, and no single vendor has visibility of everything that is going on. So it will always be partial, but helpful. You can search backward in time for suspicious IOCs. This is something that in the past has been quite hard to do because it's a huge search. We're going to productize it in the coming version, but any of you that wants to start doing it already has threat intelligence sources, reach out to us, to customer success, and they can help you do it today. SOAR is always helpful for investigating, but even more so for doing stuff that is very straightforward. If you looked at the response was, okay, let's block this IOC, let's remove this file, let's suspend this user, let's resume this user once everything is okay, and possibly let's reinstall some things on that endpoint that was damaged. Being able to do all of those with a single click is really nice. Being able to do all of those with a single click after asking a customer if you're an MSSP, receiving OK, and then doing a single click and being done with it is really nice. Endpoint agent is a great way of doing response, right? You would have many different users with very varying levels of controls that you have, but one thing you can standardize on is on the endpoint agent that would allow you to consistently respond across your full set of customers if you're an MSSP, across your entire install base, so it's easy. Last but not least, once you have an attack, you can always use that to further automate, so all the searches that we did here manually can easily be rolled into a playbook. So next time you get this IOC, you don't have to go through all those 4 or 5 different steps that we went through, but we can actually build the playbook to, hey, if you find an IOC that looks kind of like Cobalt Strike, this is what you do. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, done. So this would make life a lot easier. So that was threat intelligence and a little taste of SOAR for actual remediation. Now we'll talk a little bit about UEBA. So remember, our UEBA is basically taking logs. They could be VPN logs, they could be authentication logs, they could be web proxy logs, and we're forwarding them to our machine learning engine in the cloud after we anonymize, encrypt anything personal, and obfuscate it. And what we find there, we find anomalies. Any unusual behavior in the pattern of those logins or web accesses or VPN accesses can be used to start investigation.
Yeah, so our UEBA also provides some inbuilt alerting mechanism that will help you to start your threat hunting from. So you'll always need something to start, and UEBA provides that to you. So let's say the possible exfiltration. So you receive some potential exfiltration and anomaly, and if you go into the incident overview, you'll see the timestamp, the user involved, and the potential threat with the risk score the UEBA has provided. Looking further into the UEBA dashboard, so we are, for here, as an example, we are specifying a very specific use case here. So a user is seen exporting or uploading significant file to a cloud storage. So if you look into the log itself, it's saying that mega.co.nz. So that's a cloud storage often used by threat actors as well. So let's get back to this. So if you see the observed pattern, so we also have pair comparison in the UEBA. So if you have the same peer group and a user is showing some kind of anomalous activities, there's a comparison in a graphical interface. So observed is 1.31 ZV there. So average for any other users in the peer group is 26.67, but for any, including those peers, the highest expected any user is 766.9 MB. So there's a historical data being collected for throughout the timeline. The UEBA is there, and according to the peer comparison, any anomaly detected by the UEBA is presented in a graphical screen.
And what this does for you is, if you set the threshold to 50 megabytes or 100 megabytes, that means you're getting a lot of alerts from a lot of users many, many times. What this allows you is to find the one that is really anomalous without having to worry about, I need to adjust the threshold today because yesterday somebody did 500 megs. So this all happens automatically. And as a result, you get a reduced number of more specific alerts that would allow you to actually hunt for something happening.
So if you want to correlate that anomaly through other log sources you have, so maybe a proxy. So if you start a process evaluation there and convert the data, bytes of data into megabytes and see that that's a reasonable chance that you will see some spikes during the same time. And it will help us identify that real suspicious activity is being performed there. So once you have the suspicious user activity, then you would possibly like to get more contextual information about the user. So what is the user associated to which group of the Active Directory, and the creation of that particular user. Maybe a short-lived user is there. Usually malware actors or the threat actors usually use a privileged account. They create a high privileged account. They do something, and to get rid of the detections, they then kill that account. So these short-lived accounts are also a matter of interest here.
Yeah, so somebody uploaded a lot of data is not in itself any kind of breach or any kind of problem. But if you run the playbook, all of a sudden you know the user and the user type, and you know if it's, hey, is this an admin? Is this a new user that has just been created, possibly by an attacker? Did they just change their password? All of a sudden we have a lot more context around that single action that in itself, yes, is suspicious, but is not enough to really know what is going on. So instead of going through those stages manually, this is coming out of the box and is available for you to do. Not only that, in the coming version, we'll also have the ability to whitelist. Those of you that were in my roadmap session will remember that not only are we enriching and adding context to those potential threat hunting indications, but we're also allowing you, hey, I looked at it, and after I've seen all the big picture, I'm deciding that not a problem. Maybe I asked the user, maybe I just looked and understood. You can whitelist, and there will be no more alerts about this transfer for a period of time.
Yeah, so now we have the user. We want to pivot around the host that is involved. So just like the other slides, user equals the particular user of interest, and we chart count by host. Further, you can look for specific actions that are performed. So we have Suricata IDS that is trying to say something about that particular event. So that's always correlations that you can perform.
And this adds more context.
Exactly. So DNS logs might be the other way to correlate. So you have the DNS query there with the Windows Sysmon also, and you can see the processes involved in that. So if you see this information, there is rclone, which is a very, very popular tool available for managing the cloud storage. So it's compatible with Dropbox, also with the AWS S3 buckets, and so on. So very,
if Ashley Holmes is an advanced user or an administrator, maybe they used it manually. But if they're not, then this could be another pretty good indication that this is part of a malware attack.
So in most of the modern day next generation firewalls, so you'll need to enable the HTTPS inspections if you want to see such storage, cloud storage being used for the data exfiltration.
So
yeah, so it's showing the same thing.
we're seeing
clone.
the R clone
Yeah.
running on the endpoint. And now we have a pretty good picture, right? Somebody used the Mega Cloud storage filter, used the R clone to upload quite a lot of data. And this is an existing user that has been there, not necessarily a new password, but we wanted to verify that this is okay. So what do? If we think that this is actually a problem, then we can again use an existing playbook that can reset user credentials, right?
Yeah.
This is a playbook that exists out of the box. And you can, like before, block IOC, reset user credentials, block user sign-ins. In this specific case, it's, okay, let's ask Ashley to reset the password because somebody likely took over the endpoint and used their credentials. We could also isolate the endpoint in case we're worried there is something we didn't clean up all the way, or we can just remediate the user. So lessons, a lot easier now. Again, good TI, but same lessons as before. How interesting. But really, UEBA is a good way of finding especially things that are related to internal threat, but also data exfiltration that is being done by an attacker. Because if the attacker managed to get in under the radar, the point where we have a pretty good chance of catching them is when we see an anomaly in the behavior of the user. And then from there, we can work back. UEBA is quite useful for that. Any questions about either of those two attacks or about the tools that we talked about? If you're not asking, I will ask. How many of you have SOAR enabled? Great, Nikolai. We're very happy that you do. So you saw some of the things that SOAR can do for you. Those are things that are not, hey, I need to build a playbook that would be good for me. Those are things that we're providing in the existing product, and you can simply investigate something that comes from threat intelligence and then say, okay, yes, this is problematic, and remediate. How many of you tried Agent X yet? Not yet. How many of you were in the Agent X session earlier today? Okay, that's nice. How many of you are going to try it? Okay, so again, to supplement the threat intelligence or the UEBA information that you can use for starting a threat hunting, but an easy threat hunting exercise, is the ability to get more information, more forensic data from the endpoint and to respond. Because if we're not fixing it, what's the point? Any questions, second thoughts? Okay, so how are we for time? We actually have a bit more time. Do we want to continue to the next one? Do you want one more? Yes. Okay, here's an encore from Vasudev. So
I think Bhavesh should be a good person to present this because he prepared this entire lab and the
okay, so Bhavesh, we're going to talk about specific MFA attacks and about phishing. Another way we're looking at threat hunting. And this is specifically about stealing session cookies and then being able to bypass the ability and the need for authentication. Babesh, this is actually research you published, right? Yes. So you may have seen some of the publications of our security research team on our blog. And if you didn't, I'll encourage you to take a look. We're publishing continuously, at least once a month, and definitely in some cases, significantly more than that. So tell us about this.
So just recently, Microsoft published in their report saying that threat actors now are bypassing MFA in their phishing attacks. So previously, they are trying to brute force the accounts. For now, they have changed the strategy. So now, instead, they are going to bypass them because now they have found that the mechanisms used by the identity providers providing the identity services have some faults because now the MFA and other second level authentication layer, because now adversaries can directly attack those layers instead of the identity provider, because now these MFA sessions, after the user has authenticated using MFA, now the identity provider will provide the cookies, so the cookies will be stored by the browser. So instead of attacking the identity provider, might be Azure, might be AWS, so instead they go to the directly target the endpoint and exfiltrate the cookies from the browser so that no MFA prompt will be required. So here one of the most popular tool, EvilJinx 2. So it's on version 2 already. So very much popular open source tool. It can directly proxy the connection so that the attacker's MITM server will be in the middle. That will be proxying the connection between your identity provider and the endpoint, so that you will see that you will authenticating with the real server. The MITM will just proxy the connection. So
if you think two-factor authentication solves all problems, well, it does improve things, but still, for everything we do, an attacker would do an additional thing.
So here is it in action. So you can see that it has successfully compromised the password as well as the authentication token. So since now the attacker has the authentication token of the MFA, for this the user must first successfully authenticate and then pass the MFA. So the MFA authentication cookies will be intercepted by the EvilJinx so that they can now import that cookie into their own browsers and then use it from there. So what are its characteristics? So that you can see in the sign-in logs, the sign-in will be performed from the attacker server, so that because the attacker will be proxying the connection, so that not your IP address, but instead the attacker's IP address will be seen there. So there's one. So always try to detect the anonymous IP address coming from anywhere. So it is recommended. So that, and another one is that because the cookies are the same, so that there will be same session IDs in the logs, so that just you have to look for session IDs with multiple IP addresses, so that you can see that the same session IDs coming and used by IP address from different countries or different ASN numbers, so that you will directly see anomalous activity there. So
Potential for threat hunting, because again, you can't really set up a rule, an efficient rule that will look for every single session ID of every single browser session done by every single user in the organization.
So how to hunt this? So that now it might be difficult to first comprehend, but using the logs that you fetch using the Office 365 API, that will give you the unified audit logs. It is not directly clear how to differentiate MFA sign-ins, so that in the Azure portal, it is very simple. You can see the authentication requirement. It will show multi-factor authentication. And you can see in the authentication details what MFA method was used, so that OTP or SMS based. But in the unified audit logs, this information are not present there, so that you will have to use another trick to identify them. So another trick will be, the trick here is to identify the SCS endpoint that is used internally by the OAuth session during the MFA session, so that now you will have to search for that in the request type, so that if you see those SCS endpoints come in the request log, you will see that, okay, these are MFA signage that are happening there, so that you will just have to look for multiple IP addresses coming using those MFA signage in a short time. As you can see, now as said earlier, EvilJinx will just proxy a connection, so that you will, in the audit log, the browser as well as the OS will be your real browser and OS setting, so that the attacker's values will not be recorded in the audit log. And if you want to create a logic here, so that you just look for sign in from your legitimate location, followed by the same authentication from a different location, might be from anomalous or other suspicious country, in a short time, because this will show that first a user has logged in, and later on the MFA cookie was used by the attacker, so that you will see these two happening in a very short time.
Now, that's if we're lucky and the attacker is only a little sophisticated. If they're more sophisticated, you can still see them coming from the same country or even from the same area. Then you can look, for example, for VPN gateways, consumer VPN gateways.
So just another logic, you can see the session ID, the same session ID is being used by multiple user agents. So another, because this is a scenario where the attacker has successfully exfiltrated the cookies and used in their browser that is different. So you can see multiple browsers using the same session IDs that was exfiltrated. So there's one problem when you have Microsoft 365 and Azure AD. So the problem is that the data sources are scattered around multiple data sources. So you have Azure AD sign-ins, you have unified audit logs, you have Azure AD admin activity. So these are scattered. So if you use the default Office 365 feature that uses the Office 365 API, so you will only get some of the events, like you will get logins, but you will not get non-interactive logins. So you will not see applications or service principal logging in. So that is one very big blind spot there. So have an understanding of what you are getting and what you are not. So understand the blind spots that are available. So if you use, or if you have Azure AD Identity Protection, so there are default anomaly alerts that you will get. So in the UI, you will get the typically unfamiliar sign-in properties, like if you log in from different countries, so you will get this type of alerts. So if you use the SOAR, you can fetch them. So here we have used a playbook that uses Microsoft Graph to fetch the user's risk information, so that you can see what was the risk level of the user. So another method, another information that is very valuable is the Azure AD conditional access information that is missing in the unified audit log, so that if you use Azure AD and you don't delegate your authentication to another service provider like Okta, so you definitely use the Azure AD conditional access, that is the heart of Zero Trust Network that was put forward by Microsoft. Yes, so can you go back one? So here you can see we are using playbooks, SOAR playbooks, to fetch the conditional access information from Azure AD, so that you can see which conditional access policies was blocking your sign-ins. So here you don't have to go to the Azure portal. You can see directly all the information from a single point.
Okay, so again, not doing anything magic here, just saving you a lot of typing across multiple screens with multiple interfaces that at least I personally will never have time to learn.
Okay, so you can remediate the workflows. Here you see this is a revoke sign-in session. So in most of the cases, just resetting the user credential will not be enough. So you will have to revoke the tokens provided by the identity provider. So in case of Azure AD, you have to revoke the JWT tokens so that the access will be revoked immediately. So at present, it is very difficult to parse the conditional access information from the logs. If you have Azure AD log analytics workspace, if you use our fetcher to fetch the Azure AD conditional access information, the log provider will be a very nested JSON form, so it is quite difficult to parse and aggregate the results. So we are going to release the new JSON parser plugin so that now it will be easier to directly parse the nested fields at runtime. So you will not have to know what normalizations or what taxonomy are there. So just use the field and dynamically pass through them. So it uses the internal JQ processor. So if you have used it, you can directly walk the JSON tree to dynamically pass whatever field you require, and you can directly aggregate that.
Right? So not only the analyst's life is not that easy, as you know, but the admin's work is not easy either, because when it comes to actual complex sources of logs, we will help you with the additional data. So for example, the nested JSONs plugin, that would be great if you're actually trying to retrieve data from Azure AD. Another nice thing that is coming up in the coming version is the Azure AD detector from UEBA that actually takes that data in and tries to find anomalies without requiring the additional interaction.
So we are also releasing this new source template that will help you to investigate Azure AD sign-in. So you can see here the failed and successful sign-ins regions. So you can see how many logins were blocked by the conditional access. You can search sign-ins by device. And another one enrichment we have done in the new version is we have directly enriched the application name in the log. So if you use the default one, or if you use directly the Azure AD fetch Office 365 fetcher, you will just get the application ID GUID. So that will be very difficult to analyze. So we dynamically now parse the application name. So you can see what application the user is signing from. That will be Azure Portal, Office Home. So that will have to, this will make your hunt easier. So try it out.
And with that, into the summary of the bonus session for this one. We actually went into slightly more advanced items, and the next session will be really nice advanced items. But understanding what flows here and leveraging our generic fetchers is a great start. Whenever there is something more complex that is common to many users, the security research team not only builds new content for you, meaning new detection rules and new playbooks, we also do the plugins, like you just heard about the JSON editing, and if there's any other needs that come up when you're finding out that, hey, this data is not right for me. I have the data, but there's a lot of manual work to process it, or I even need, hey, I need to do a statistical analysis, and I don't have the tool ready. All of those are things that the security research team does every day for our customers. Just let us know that you need something, or better yet, follow their blogs, because sometimes you'll find out that you have something available that you didn't even know you need yet. And you can, of course, always download and consume it. With that, thank you very much, Basudev, and thank you, Babesh. Babesh will also be leading the next session where we talk about additional high-level threat scenarios. We have a break, right? Until 3:15. 3:15, we'll be back here. Thank you very much.